What if one of the most powerful things that you could do to protect your brain from dementia wasn't a medication, wasn't a supplement, didn't cost you a penny, and most people are getting this wrong every single night? So a major study published this year looked at over 300,000 people in the UK Biobank, one of the biggest health databases in the world, and found that people with the worst sleep patterns had a 76% higher risk of developing dementia than those with the best sleep patterns. And for vascular dementia specifically, the type caused by poor blood flow around the brain, the risk more than doubled. So in this video, we're going to talk about why sleep is so deeply connected to dementia, what the worst sleep habits actually look like, how this damage shows up in subtle ways from your 50s and 60s onwards, and what you can actually do about all of this. And I'm also going to share my own experience of working really irregular night shifts in the A&E, how that affected me personally, and ultimately what I had to do about it. Because the honest truth is something that a lot of healthcare workers and other public workers don't want to hear. Now, to understand why bad sleep causes dementia, you need to understand what your brain is actually doing while you're sleeping, because it's not just switched off. Your brain is actually doing some of its most important work overnight, or when you're asleep anyway. The brain produces waste products constantly throughout your day. Things like toxic proteins, used up chemical messengers, metabolic debris, and if those aren't cleared out of your brain, they start to accumulate and damage the brain structure itself. Now, the system that handles this is called the glymphatic system. Think of this like your brain's overnight clearing crew. Literally a network of channels that opens up during sleep to flush out waste from the brain. During sleep, this system clears out proteins associated with Alzheimer's disease, what we call amyloid beta and tau proteins, TAU. Literally flushing them out of your brain into the bloodstream to then be disposed of and excreted. Now, the mechanism for this waste clearance system occurs primarily during slow wave sleep, the deepest stage where your brain activity slows right down. So what happens when you cut your sleep short, or where you never really reach that deep stage properly, is that your cleaning crew in your brain never really gets a chance to finish the job. And what that means is that beta amyloid and tau, these proteins most closely associated with Alzheimer's disease, begin to accumulate and form plaques and tangles in the brain tissue that gradually damage and kill your brain cells. Now, this isn't a sudden process. It is a very, very slow build-up over years and decades. And by the time your symptoms appear, the damage in the brain has typically been underway for decades and decades. And that is the same with these other chronic health conditions that I talk about across this channel. Now, let's talk about what this new research actually found. So the UK Biobank study followed 313,000 adults aged 50 and over who were dementia-free at the start. They didn't have dementia at the start of this study. Over the follow-up period, there were over 7,000 new cases of dementia in these people. Now, people with the worst sleep scores, measuring 7 different sleep factors, including duration, insomnia, daytime sleepiness, snoring, these people had a 76% higher risk of all-cause dementia and more than double the risk of vascular dementia compared to those people with the healthier sleep patterns. What makes this study particularly important is that this wasn't just looking at one aspect of sleep in isolation. It measured sleep as a whole picture. How long you sleep, how well you sleep, when you sleep, whether you have insomnia, whether you're constantly tired during the day, and found that the combination of all those factors matters enormously. Separate research from the same UK Biobank database found that people with poor sleep had brains that appeared on average 1 year older than their actual age on MRI scans. And that gap between brain age and your actual chronological age widened by roughly 6 months for every 1 extra point drop in sleep health score. Your sleep quality is literally physically aging your brain. The big question that a lot of you are going to have is, what are these really bad sleep patterns? Well, the researchers in this study gave every participant a sleep score out of 7, 1 point for each of these. So sleeping between 7 and 9 hours a night, falling asleep at a reasonable hour rather than very late, having no insomnia symptoms, no snoring, no excessive daytime sleepiness, no need to nap regularly, and also waking feeling actually refreshed rather than exhausted. 7 out of 7 is perfect sleep. 0 to 2 out of 7 is in the danger zone, and that's where the 76% higher dementia risk actually sits. What's really striking about the risk is that it's not binary. Even people scoring in the middle ranges, 3 or 4 out of 7, had an 18% higher dementia risk than the best sleepers in this study. And those scoring 5 out of 7 had a 7% higher risk. In other words, the damage scales with how poor your sleep is, and it starts well before you reach rock bottom. So it's worth asking yourself honestly where you'd score. 7 to 9 hours a night, yes or no? Do you get it? Do you wake feeling really rested? Do you fall asleep at a sensible time, or do you stay up until 11 p.m. or midnight? Do you get through the day without crashing or needing to nap just to function? Do you snore badly or wake up throughout the night repeatedly? Each of those things absolutely counts, and they all add up. So what does being at the low end of that scale actually look like day to day? Well, it's the person who's consistently running on 5 or 6 hours, thinking that they have just adapted to it, not realizing that feeling used to tiredness is not the same as not being harmed by it, if that makes sense. It's the person who lies awake for an hour or more most nights with their mind racing, unable to switch off. It's the person who wakes at 3 a.m. and stares at the ceiling until the alarm goes off. It's the person who falls asleep on the sofa at 4 p.m. without meaning to, but then can't get to sleep at a normal hour. It's the shift worker, like all healthcare workers and police officers and everybody else who does night shifts, whose body clock has been so disrupted for so long that it genuinely doesn't know what time of day it is. And it's the person who has a couple of drinks every evening to wind down, because while alcohol does make you fall asleep faster, it then spends the rest of the night dismantling the architecture of sleep and suppressing the deep stages of sleep where the brain actually repairs and clears itself. Which is why you can sleep 8 hours after drinking and still wake up feeling like you haven't slept at all. A separate study using 25 years of follow-up data found that people in their 50s and 60s getting 6 hours or less per night were 30% more likely to develop dementia later on compared to those getting 7 hours. Now, I don't know about you, but I know lots of people who get less than 6 hours sleep. What's really important to understand is that the midlife window matters enormously. The damage being laid down in your 50s may not surface as a diagnosis until your 70s or 80s, but the process, as with all of these chronic diseases, starts decades earlier, very quietly before any symptoms appear. So let's talk about what this early decline actually looks like, the subtle signs from the age of 50 or so onwards. And this is the part that doesn't get talked about enough, because most people assume that dementia arrives very suddenly and very obviously as well. Well, it doesn't. The early changes are incredibly subtle and easy to explain away. In your 50s, it might just be that words don't come to you as quickly as they used to. You're mid-sentence and the name of something really familiar just sort of disappears temporarily. Or it might be that you walk into a room and you can't remember why you went there more often than before. Or that planning something complex like organising a trip or managing a project at work feels slightly more effortful than it once did. In your 60s, it could start to look like asking the same question twice in a short period of time without realising it, or getting slightly confused on a familiar route, or finding it harder to keep track of your finances or your bills. The key difference between normal aging and early dementia is that with normal aging, memory lapses are occasional and they don't disrupt your daily life. With early dementia, the changes are gradual but persistent, and often the person themselves is the last to notice them. The other important point is that mood changes can be an early sign too, so becoming more irritable, more anxious, or more withdrawn from society. And these are frequently put down to stress or depression, when in fact they might be the brain beginning to struggle. So if you're in your 50s or your 60s and you're noticing these things progressing in yourself or somebody close to you, then it's a reason to see a doctor. And your sleep might not be the cause, but either way, it's important to go and see your doctor and have a conversation about your lifestyle. So for a significant part of my career working in A&E, I had been doing irregular shifts, as most doctors and nurses and paramedics and radiographers do, most healthcare people, including long stretches of permanent night shifts as a locum doctor. And what happened to my sleep over that time is incredibly alarming in retrospect. I became effectively an insomniac. During days off work, I couldn't sleep when I needed to, and then I would crash and fall asleep in the afternoon completely involuntarily. I tried melatonin, which a lot of healthcare workers try. I tried Nitol, and while they helped in the short term, they clearly were not solving the problem. My body had simply lost its sense of when it was supposed to be awake or asleep. In the A&E itself, I was always switched on. I loved the work, I loved the environment, it kept me awake, it kept me wired. It's so noisy that there's no way you could fall asleep there. And as a result, thankfully, I was never unsafe at work. But it was my family life, my home life, the ordinary things where everything suffered. And that's the really sad thing about shift work. You can hold everything together while you're at work professionally, while everything else at home quietly falls apart. And honestly, I reached a point where, because of this channel, I was reading so much research into the long-term risks that poor sleep has, including things like cancer and heart disease and your all-cause mortality. And I had to step away. And I completely understand that most people cannot do that. Most people can't just simply step away from work or have a completely different work routine. I'm incredibly lucky that I am able to do this YouTube channel. And now the vast majority of my time is spent doing this, but also working day shifts in the A&E. I am so grateful I'm able to do this. My honest advice, and it's really not easy to hear, is this: if you work irregular sleep patterns consistently and you cannot change them, you have to understand that this carries real long-term risk to your health. The best thing that you can do, if at all possible, is work towards a life where your sleep can be consistent. So that might mean a different role, a different shift pattern, a different career path altogether. For most people, that's not realistic. I completely get that, I really do. But if it is possible for you, then the decision is really worth taking seriously. Because if you can go from a life where you're sleeping really inconsistently because of your work to a life where your sleep is really consistent and you're getting 7 to 8 hours a day, this will have a massive impact on your long-term health. There are numerous studies that point to this. And if you genuinely cannot change your hours at work, then everything else in this video and across this channel becomes even more important for you. Before I get into the specifics, and this doesn't apply to everybody, but I just want you to think about the things that doctors tell people to do that reduce their risk of Alzheimer's disease and other serious diseases. Things like changing your diet, starting to exercise, losing weight, reducing your stress levels. All of those things are genuinely quite hard for a lot of people if you're not used to them. They require effort, they require willpower, they require you to add something new and uncomfortable into your life. But sleep is different. You already sleep every day. If you're getting 6 hours a night, getting to 7 or 8 isn't adding a new habit, it is just extending one that you're already doing. And you're literally unconscious while that happens. I get it's not as easy as that, but really going from 6 to 8 hours or 6 to 7, you don't feel that extra hour. You just wake up having had it. And the barrier to getting there is often quite small. It means going to bed an hour earlier, putting the phone down, blocking the apps that keep you scrolling until midnight. For most people, that's it. Now, I'm not minimizing how hard sleep can actually be for people with genuine insomnia, with young children or babies or elderly parents to care for, or shift work with anxiety that keeps them awake. Those are absolutely real and serious challenges, and I'll get onto them in a minute. But for a large number of people, the gap between the sleep they're getting and the sleep that protects their brain, for a lot of people, is 1 hour. And the thing standing in the way very often is a screen. And so that is another conversation to have, and I'll probably do that in another video. So let me walk you through what the evidence actually points to. And I want to do this in a way that feels really useful rather than just sort of a list of things to try. If I had a patient sitting in front of me right now asking me what to prioritize, the first thing I would want to know is what time they wake up, because everything else in sleep medicine flows from that single anchor point. A fixed wake time, the same time every single day, including weekends, is the foundation that everything else is built on. Not a flexible bedtime, not aiming to get 8 hours from whenever you fall asleep. A fixed morning alarm, the same time every day, no snooze, no weekend lie-ins. So pick a time, 6:30 or 7 or 8, whatever fits around your life and your routine. And then protect it like it really matters, because it does. The reason this works is that the brain builds up something called sleep pressure across the day, a chemical called adenosine that accumulates the longer you've been awake and drives the urge to sleep. A consistent wake time means that pressure builds up reliably, and within a few weeks you'll find yourself genuinely tired at an earlier point in the evening, which solves the problem of not being able to fall asleep at a reasonable time without you having to force it. If you vary your wake time by 2 hours at the weekend, which most people do, you're essentially giving yourself jet lag twice a week. It sounds daft, but this is what the research says, and I've experienced this myself. And you then start to wonder why your sleep never really sort of feels settled, and this quite often is the answer. The next thing I'd ask that patient is what they're doing in the first 30 minutes after waking up, because this is where most people are leaving very easy gains on the table. What we know is that getting outside into natural daylight within half an hour of waking up for at least 10 minutes is the most powerful free tool for sleep quality that exists. And that doesn't mean sitting at a window and getting sun on your face. It means actually getting outside in the fresh air. Even an overcast British morning is great. Outdoor light is orders of magnitude brighter than indoor lighting, and it resets the brain's internal clock through the eyes in a way that nothing artificial could ever replicate. Apart from maybe those light panels that you can buy online, those are a good temporary fix if you live in a part of the world that doesn't really get a lot of daylight until later in the morning or the time of year. But really, trying to get out as soon as the sun comes up is the best thing. If you do this consistently, then you'll start to feel sleepy earlier in the evening, not because you're trying to, but because the brain's timing system is finally calibrated properly. It's all about your circadian rhythm. It also wakes you up faster in the morning, which makes getting up at that fixed time actually bearable rather than miserable. And then I would ask about caffeine, because almost everybody is having it too late in the day and almost no one realizes the damage it's doing to their deep sleep. So caffeine works by blocking the adenosine receptors in the brain, essentially blocking the signal that tells the brain that it's tired. The half-life of caffeine is 5 to 6 hours, which means that a coffee at 2 p.m. still has half the caffeine active at 8 p.m. So it won't necessarily stop you falling asleep, but it suppresses the deep, slow wave sleep stages, the ones where your brain is clearing its waste. You'll fall asleep, you'll feel like you slept, but the quality will be significantly worse. A really hard cutoff at 1 p.m. is the practical rule, or midday if you're really sensitive to caffeine, and then switching to decaf in the afternoon. This preserves the ritual without the hidden cost. From there, the conversation would turn to the bedroom itself, because the environment you're sleeping in is either working with your biology or against it. So the body needs to drop its core temperature by around a degree to get into and then stay in deep sleep, which means a cool bedroom around 16 or 18 degrees Celsius. Obviously, you can fall asleep at warmer temperatures, but to get your proper deep sleep, 16 to 18 is best. Thinking about your environment means thinking about your bedding as well, going lighter than you think you need. Blackout curtains or a sleep mask, because even dim light suppresses melatonin, the hormone that signals nighttime to the brain, in ways that are measurable and really, really meaningful. And also your phone as well, not just because of the screen light, but because having it in the room means that your brain never fully disengages. The most effective thing that you can do is charge it outside of the bedroom and then use a separate alarm clock. For most people, that one structural change removes the entire decision about scrolling at midnight because the phone simply isn't there to reach for. And then we've got alcohol and exercise timing and stress. These are all connected, and it's worth understanding them together rather than in isolation. So alcohol is particularly important because this cultural belief that alcohol helps you sleep is so widespread, but it's so absolutely wrong. Yes, it puts you to sleep faster, and then it spends the rest of the night fragmenting the rest of your sleep, suppressing the deep and REM sleep stages and waking you earlier than you otherwise would. People who drink regularly often have no idea their sleep quality is as poor as it is because they're not conscious of the disruption because they're asleep. Cutting out alcohol, or at a minimum stopping 3 hours before bed, usually produces really meaningful improvements within 2 to 3 weeks. And then on exercise, the timing really, really matters as well. And this comes from somebody who has exercised literally at all hours of the day and the night. Hard exercise within 2 to 3 hours of bed raises your cortisol and your body temperature at exactly the wrong moment. So morning or early afternoon is absolutely strongly preferable. And as well as that, the light exposure from an outdoor morning workout, if you can, makes it doubly effective. And then finally on stress, something that works really well for me is just a simple 10 minutes brain dump right before bed. So writing every worry and every task for tomorrow onto paper, offloading sort of this mental stress that you've got from the day that might otherwise keep you awake. Now, this won't work for everybody. For some people, this will be the opposite of what they want before they go to bed. For me, it works, and it sounds really simple, but the research absolutely backs it up. And then actually the really final thing is that if you snore loudly or you wake up unrefreshed, no matter how long you've slept, or you have headaches during the day, or you're overweight and carry a lot of weight around your chest and your neck, you could have undiagnosed sleep apnea. It's really worth booking a GP appointment and really pushing for a sleep study on this. This is something that's really, really underdiagnosed, but it's so easily treatable. And once you're diagnosed and treated, it can have massive, massive effects on your life and your risk of other diseases as well. You have to remember that sleep isn't just this passive state where you're unconscious and just lying there. This is the most active period of maintenance that your brain undergoes. And the evidence from the largest studies available tells us very clearly that getting it wrong over years and decades raises the risk of dementia and other chronic diseases in a way that is meaningful and dose dependent. The good news is that unlike your genetics, unlike your age, this is something that you can actually influence and for most people fix quite easily. And that includes a fixed wake time. It means morning light. It means cutting caffeine after midday or 1 p.m. It means a cool, dark bedroom. It means no phone in the room, cutting alcohol out, regular morning exercise as well. These are the specific levers that sleep medicine uses to rebuild your sleep quality, and most of them cost nothing and they require no willpower once they become a habit. Your brain's cleaning system runs every single night. How well it runs depends entirely on the sleep you give it.